Hello, I'm Matt Forde and I'm here at the office of Tony Blair at the Institute of Global Change to talk about Brexit. Tony, it's nearly 3 years now since we had the referendum. People are sick and tired of talking about Brexit. Everyone's bored of it. Isn't the best thing just to get on with it and deliver it as soon as possible?
Well, the best thing is to get on with it and make a decision about what we want. The trouble is, what the government's proposing now is essentially the very thing they promised wouldn't happen, which is a kind of blind Brexit. So if you look at the withdrawal agreement the government's come up with, the deal, when it comes to the future relationship between Britain and Europe, it's completely vague now. So we don't know whether we're getting a soft Brexit, a hard Brexit, what type of Brexit. And to leave in those circumstances means you won't get on with it. You'll just have the same arguments we're having now, we'll be having for the next 2 or 3 years, maybe more, but just in a different form.
But the public mood is one of exhaustion, isn't it? People are bored of it. Most people are busy and they just want it dealt with.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I completely understand it. So what people want is closure. You know, they want an end to the thing. But no clarity, no closure. So if you postpone the essential decision about what the future relationship with Britain and Europe is, if you postpone that decision, you postpone the closure. And this is the problem, because in the end, the whole difficulty with Brexit is you've been 4.5 decades in this unique trading system in Europe. So when you think of the companies like Nissan, for example, that have come and set up in the UK precisely for the European market, or you take, London's the financial centre for the single currency, even though Britain's not part of the single currency. So all of these complex investment and commercial decisions, the whole of our economy has been structured around the fact we're part of that trading system. The problem with Brexit is very simple. If you pull yourself out of that trading system, you're going to cause yourself damage. On the other hand, you go for a soft Brexit, which is what some people want, and you say, okay, we're going to carry on abiding by the rules of Europe, but we leave the political structures. All you've done is give up your seat at the table. So this dilemma, as I call it, between the painful Brexit and the pointless Brexit, is why Parliament can't reach a decision. So what have they decided to do at the moment? That is, let's not come to a decision. Let's just leave and then work it out afterwards. But that is crazy for the country to do, because then you're in a situation where you've given up all your negotiating leverage and you haven't even made a decision.
You're in support of a people's vote, another referendum. You won 3 general elections. No one ever said, oh, well, let's go back and contest 2005 or 2001 because now we disagree with what he's doing.
Yeah, sure, but we always knew that another election was coming up, by the way. So, no, that's right. But I think there are 2 reasons in my view, for a fresh referendum. One is just the natural consequence of, back in June 2016, of course we were voting to leave the European Union, but we didn't know what we were getting in its place. Now my whole point is, once you know what you're getting, isn't it entirely reasonable to say, let's compare what we have with what we're going to get and then see if we want to proceed? So I think there's a case for a second referendum in any event, but that case is today infinitely stronger because of the mess. I mean, no one can dispute that this thing has been anything other than massively more complicated, very divisive. Parliament can't agree. The Prime Minister had a deal voted down by a massive majority in Parliament. You've got a split cabinet, a split government, a split Conservative Party. Actually, even the Labour Party split to a degree on it. Isn't it, in those circumstances, why is it so unreasonable to say to the people, I mean, we're not asking a different people, we're asking the British people, in these circumstances, do you really want to proceed or not?
But having another referendum and winning one are 2 very different things, aren't they? The social problems that underpinned the Leave vote have not been addressed since 2016. What makes you think that people would vote any differently this time?
Well, I agree, it's going to be a battle, whatever you do. But I think the thing that would be different this time, if the campaign is fought in a proper way, is, look, I understand the reasons that gave rise to Brexit. There are anxieties about immigration, and let's deal with those in a moment, as it were. But there are also anxieties about communities left behind, people feeling, their lives are pretty hopeless. Globalization may work for some people, but hasn't worked for others. The thing is, it's not an answer to any of these problems to get out of the European Union.
Yeah, but we said that in the first referendum.
That's true, and people rejected that and decided that it was. But part of the problem in that first referendum is we never really attacked the whole basis of the Brexit case. The basis of the Brexit case is we're not an independent country. We don't make our own rules. Europe makes the rules. And as a result of that, we've lost our sovereignty and we can't sort our own problems out. It's a myth. We make our own rules. I mean, if your problem's the health service, we're in complete charge of the health service. If your problem is your kid's not getting properly educated, we're in charge of our education system. You want taxes up, you want them down, we decide it. You want more spending, you want less spending, you want austerity, you don't want austerity. These are decisions that British politicians are responsible for. The only rules that we have given up, as it were, complete sovereignty over, are those we've agreed should be part of this single market arrangement so that you can trade more easily, which actually, for many of those constituencies, for example, in the north of England, has meant more jobs and more investment, not less.
The backstop has been a huge part of this discussion. Do you know what it is? Because a lot of people seem to struggle to explain it.
Well,
how would you explain the backstop in a sentence or two?
So the backstop is to make sure that the border between North and South in Ireland remains open if the government and Europe can't agree a different way of keeping it open. And the backstop is to keep us locked in, essentially, a customs union with Europe.
But you can understand why leavers would say, well, this is just a way of keeping us in the European Union by the back door.
Well then, I mean, the simple answer to that is, I mean, not that I would agree with it, but you say, well, we're prepared to have Northern Ireland a different relationship to Europe and the rest of the UK.
But then Scotland says...
Yeah, well, but this is the consequence of Brexit. I mean, the thing with these guys is they advocate Brexit and then kind of say to everyone else, go figure out the consequences. And you say, well, what do you say is the solution to this? No, there's just got to be a solution. You find that. It's unbelievable, actually, when you think of the way these guys, I mean, they've literally got a whole series of completely incompatible negotiating objectives. So you remember when David Davis used to stand up in the House of Commons and say, we will deliver a new relationship with Europe, which has exactly the same benefits as the single market, and with the freedom to make our own rules. And people like myself said at the time, this is impossible, you're not going to do this. No, we'll do it. And then they don't get it, and then they resign from the government, and then say to the government, you go and fix it. I mean, to be fair to Theresa May, I mean, it is an absurd position she's been put in by these people. I mean, I don't agree with her way of getting out of it, but she is literally surrounded by people making totally incompatible negotiating objectives as sort of priority for the government, and then just saying to her, well, go and sort it out with Brussels. I mean, if you take the Liam Foxes of this world, they want a Canada-style agreement. You take the Philip Hammonds of this world, they want a Norway-type arrangement. This is fundamental. So because they can't agree, and this is where the country's literally held hostage to this debate in the Conservative Party, because they can't agree, what she's finally decided to do, because remember, she tried with Chequers to bring some form of clarity. Yeah. What happened? She had a whole slew of resignations. She looked at that and thought, I can't afford any more of those. So now she's retreated into absolute ambiguity. And now they make a virtue of that. So you've got Conservative MPs who are passionate soft Brexiteers, want Norway, Conservative MPs who are passionate hard Brexiteers, want Canada, uniting together to say, let's just get the other side of March 2019 and sort it out. It's a crazy thing for the country to do.
What about the Labour position then? Because it's a party you used to be very fond of.
I'm still fond of the Labour Party.
What about the position that Labour are in then? Because they're trying to hold together a coalition of Leave and Remain voters. And the Leave voters are quite important to Labour's current poll rating and to their standing at the last general election as much as Remain voters are. Aren't they better trying to continue this constructive ambiguity, keeping both camps happy in order to get rid of the Tories?
Yeah, but the risk has always been that at a certain point, this constructive ambiguity becomes destructive indecision. And we're at that point. They're in danger of... Look, the Leave people think they're playing around with Brexit, and the Remain people think they're not supporting Remain.
So what do you say to MPs who, whatever their view, have a majority of Leave or Remain voters in their constituency? Should they represent the will of the people in their territory, or do they have a duty to their constituents to say what they really think?
Yeah, so I'm incredibly sympathetic, having been a member of Parliament for 25 years, and actually for a constituency that voted heavily Leave. I'm really sympathetic to the anxieties that MPs have, that, if the people have voted for this, then surely my job is just to deliver it. So I think if I was still in Parliament, I would be doing what actually my successor for the Sedgefield constituency is doing, because he's saying to his people and to the constituency, look, I can't hand on heart tell you Brexit is going to make any of your problems better. In fact, I think it's going to make it worse. But that's my view. But I will allow you, the British people, and you, the people in the Sedgefield constituency, to take the final decision. But I can't, when I look at this deal, tell you it's going to make your life better, because I think it isn't. And my job is to represent you to the best of my judgment as to what's in your interests. I think that's an argument that works for people, particularly if you say to them, look, let's talk about the health service. Let's talk about jobs. Let's talk about austerity. To what degree does leaving the European Union sort these problems out? It doesn't. And so I think part of the trouble is that we haven't made these big arguments to people in the right way. Because, for a constituency in the north of England to vote to leave the European Union on the basis they want greater opportunities in the economy, Brexit's not going to deliver any of that. Immigration, I think, is the one difficult question. That I think is more difficult. But again, we have complete freedom to decide our rules on immigration from outside Europe. Within Europe and freedom of movement, I think there are real problems with the way freedom of movement is operated. In my view, if we do go back to the people, we should also negotiate with Europe, and I think Europe would be very willing to consider this, a Europe-wide arrangement where we put greater controls on freedom of movement to ensure, for example, that you don't get cheap labour imported in from particularly Eastern Europe and undercut wages here. That is also an issue in the rest of Europe. And so if you want to deal with these problems, you can deal with them, is my basic point.
So you talk about March the 29th, which is just a few weeks away now. What do you think the most likely thing is? Do you think we're going to delay Article 50? Do you think we're going to crash out with no deal? Or do you think there's a third option?
So I think a delay to Article 50 is likely, because I think getting all the legislation through is extremely difficult in any event before the end of March. But the question is, if you delay it, what for? Now, in my view, if there is any delay, it should be delayed to have clarity. Decide before you leave where you're going in the future. Okay. No deal, I think, is highly unlikely, because I just think Parliament will in the end prevent it, and I think there are probably 4 or 5 cabinet ministers who would resign rather than have it. And no deal, to crash out with no deal is so irresponsible. I can't believe people are going to let that happen. So I don't think that's, I think the question is, the fundamental question for the next few weeks is, do you effectively say, as really this is, this is the Prime Minister's position now, let's just leave and work out afterwards where we go. Resolve all these questions about the future relationship between Britain and Europe afterwards, after we've left. Or do we return to what was the promise given, that you would have a meaningful vote before you leave on the future relationship as well as the withdrawal agreement? That's the central question for Parliament. And it used to be absolutely accepted that you would have that meaningful vote on the future relationship before you leave. But that's the thing that's in the last weeks. And the backstop, in a way, has got in the, it's kind of camouflaged that essential question, which is at the heart now, I think, of the debate. And my view is, if you have an extension, use it to bring the clarity that will bring closure to the issue, either through you decide a soft Brexit, or you decide a hard Brexit, or you can go back to the people. And I actually think the overwhelming desire of the country will be to end the agony of this process. And I think at the moment what's happening is that the country thinks the way to end the agony is just to leave. It's not, unless you're clear where you're going after you leave. And that's why you need, in the end, I think the logical thing is to have another referendum, and you simply say to people, what do you want? Do you want hard, do you want soft, or do you want to stay?
Scrambled.
Well, scrambled is where we are at the moment. And I think what we need is an unscrambling process. I mean, how is it a democratic outrage if you go and ask them? And just imagine this set of circumstances. Supposing when this legislation had been passed for the referendum, David Cameron or Parliament had said at the time, look, we're going to have a referendum. Once we have it, if we vote to leave, then at the end of that process, we'll have a referendum to say, do you like the New Deal or do you prefer to stay? Because then we know what we're getting in place of our European membership. I mean, most people would have said, yeah, well, that sounds reasonable enough. We're now in a situation where literally these guys say, no, if you ask us again, in the light of all this mess, in all these broken promises, it's a democratic outrage. I think, you just got to have the argument with people. By the way, the thing is, if you do have another referendum, I think this is important to say, that's got to be the end of it. And if people vote leave again, for me, that's it. You've got to get on, make leave work.
I mean, people might not know what Article 50 is. They know what it means. That means that it's basically, it triggers a deadline after which you have to leave, and that's going to be on the 29th of March. Do you think in terms of the discussion, there's all these technical phrases running around about articles, about WTO rules, and the public use these phrases, a lot of them, and say, I'm absolutely fine with WTO rules. Do you think they always appreciate the magnitude of what these things mean?
Well, the problem with all of this is that it does become extremely complicated. And one of the things I say to members of the public about members of parliament is because they often say, look, these guys are just playing around. No, the members of parliament are doing their day job. Their day job is to study politics. That's what they're put into parliament to do. And they're studying the detail.
Most of them do it.
Most of them do it, actually, most of the time. But, they're studying the detail of all this. And that's why the thing's a problem, because when you study the detail, you realize it's massively complicated and the choices are really ugly.
I mean, do you think the public have really digested how severe some of the implications of the agreement is?
Yeah, and I think it's the security side. I mean, that's why former security chiefs are lining up saying this is going to be really dangerous for Britain. I mean, this is not a good deal. On any basis, it's not a good deal. Never mind the big questions around trade and commerce. It's not a good deal for security, for future relationships around defence and so on.
In terms of bringing people back, someone said that we need to build a golden bridge over which Leave voters can retreat. The tone in which Remainers, or whatever you would call people who don't want to leave the European Union or want a second referendum, what advice would you give to those people about the tone of where the campaign, whatever we would call it, goes next, and the way we talk about people who voted Leave?
You've got to respect why people voted Leave, and you've got to respect them, and that's why I am absolutely emphatic on this. You have to take account and deal with the underlying grievances and issues. The only way you're ever going to get people to come, those people who are persuadable, to come out of the Leave position and to accept, by the way, that you can indeed have another vote of the people, is if you're mindful and respectful of why they voted the way they did, and you're prepared to deal with some of the underlying reasons, which, by the way, are not just British preoccupations. They're across the whole of Europe.
And just finally, if we don't get a second referendum, whatever happens, I mean, how angry are you going to get? Are you going to start protesting yourself and taking to the streets? Are you going to make banners?
I'll be sad, actually. I'll be sad because I think we will have taken a major decision with the destiny of our country, which impacts enormously future generations, and will have taken it in a way that's highly destructive. Not simply of our economic position and our living standards, though I think it is that, but undermines where Britain has to be in a modern world, in the 21st century, where you're going to find, without the support you get from binding together in Europe, there's no way in the world that's developing you're going to be able to hold your own with the giant powers that are going to be dominating the century. The United States of America, China, probably India. Without Europe staying together, countries of the size of Britain, Germany, France, Italy, you're going to be less able to protect your interests, less able to protect your values, less able to defend and advance your position in the world. And we will be paying the price for a long, long time to come. So, no, anger is not I get angry about the way the campaign is from time to time, but my predominant sentiment is profound sadness that we should be in this position. And if we leave in these circumstances, it's a real sense of grief, actually, about what the country's done to itself.
Tony, thank you very much. You can find out more about the Institute for Global Change by following them on Twitter @InstituteGC, and the same on Instagram.